I've been involved in a little discussion on Twitter with various well-known independence bloggers and figures, and we were discussing the idea of approaching the United Nations. Now, you may be aware that the Bahamas recently negotiated or successfully decolonized the Bahamas and chucked the United Kingdom out. And they did that through the United Nations by two speeches made by their Prime Minister and by two detailed representations to the United Nations in support of decolonisation. Now, the reason I mention this is that the Supreme Court ruling, which the SNP has elicited from the Supreme Court in London, now basically is saying in a defined legal way that Scotland has no legal route out of the Union. Now that means that we are no longer a voluntary union. In fact, we never were in the voluntary union in the first place. And that means that we have been occupied. We are possession of England. And that means that we're a colony. So technically speaking, Scotland is already colonised. And we can easily prove not only that we've been colonised and continue to be colonised, but also that our natural resources are being exploited by a foreign power, i.e. United Kingdom or Great Britain, whatever you want to call England. So we can prove when we go to the United Nations now, legally, that Scotland is trapped in the Union. It has been colonised, it's been taken over, it's been conquered, whatever you want to call it, but Scotland as a country is basically enslaved to England and cannot escape. And that means that we can now go to the United Nations and say we want to be decolonised exactly the same way as the Bahamas has. And we have all the evidence to prove that going back 315 years. Not only that, but we still have the claim of right unused. And many people have been talking about that as another potential route to independence. And it's still there on the back burner. Legally speaking, we are perfectly entitled to hold a kind of grand, what would you call it? A grand convention of the estates, which would be all of the elected officials of Scotland, and that would be all of our MPs at Westminster, including the Unionist ones incidentally, and all of our MSPs at Holyrood, including the Greens, and including the SNP and ALBA and everybody else. Now, if you put all of those people together, you've got 129 MSPs and you've got 59 MPs. And in both of those groups of individuals, pro-independence parties are in the majority. And all they would need to do is to actually vote to suspend the Union. And that can be done under the claim of right, because one of the preconditions of the Union Treaty was that the claim of right should stand in all time coming. In other words, the right of the sovereign Scots to decide how they are governed and who governs them should exist long after the Union has been going for hundreds of years. And now we know, because of the Supreme Court ruling has blundered into this and now confirmed what we suspected all along, which is that Scotland is not in a union of equals. It cannot escape. It's not being allowed to escape. It won't be told what the route is to get out of the union, and no democracy is accessible to us. And that means that we are now defined legally under international law as a colony, and we can apply for decolonisation. Or we can simply suspend or basically repeal the Acts of Union using our own claim of right. In fact, we could do both. We could go to the UN and say we're suspending the Treaty of Union by calling this grand convention of all our elected officials, and we're going to suspend the Union until the United Nations has ruled that we should be decolonised. The Bahamas managed it inside 2 years. That's, I think, a record for United Nations decolonisation. But if you think about it, if we have to wait 2 years for a general election, when we could actually be getting decolonised right now, there is this other route. So what I've outlined to you today is the fact that there are many more ways of becoming independent than are apparent to most of us, and all of them have some merit, and all of them might be possible. The idea of using the Holyrood Parliament as a way of having a general election is probably much more difficult to achieve, although I remain to be convinced that there might be a way of using the procedures of Holyrood to achieve that. Haven't yet seen any verification of it. But personally, I like this idea of decolonisation. The fact that the Bahamas could manage it inside 2 years, I think, is remarkable. And that's a tribute to their Prime Minister, who went into the UN swinging for her small country and got the United Kingdom booted out. And if she can do it, then so can we.